So today I'd like to talk about the basics of the ethics of using text analytics in an education context. So at Student Voice, we analyze a lot of student comments to try and improve their education, improve their teaching and learning, the student experience. But we have to be very deliberate in what we do and what we don't do. And I want to outline some of the key things we think about when we're analyzing the text given by students about their teaching. So why is this important? So decisions made by people but supported by software systems, right, can affect the student's progression, right, and can affect students' well-being on a broad level. Not specifically, we're not talking learning analytics here. We're talking at a broad level of, okay, how the course is structured, how things work, things like that. So we have to be ahead of the game here. We've got to make sure we're doing things for the right reasons. We have the robust processes in place to support the decision making that's happening in institutions, and make that distinction where it's people who make the decisions. The tools and the analysis we provide at Student Voice is there to support universities, right? Because they have the best context, they understand what their students really need and what would work at their institution, and they put it into place. So we want to support that as best as possible in the most ethical manner possible. So some basics of what you should do and what we do is anonymize as much as you can as early as possible. Okay, at Student Voice, for instance, we don't ever have any personal identifiable information. We just don't ever want it. It's no use to us. We don't want to be able to identify a student, right? We analyze the text of what they're saying. We can aggregate that up to large scale analyses. We don't want to know. If you keep that data off your systems, then everyone's happier. Of course, any data you do have is encrypted during transit and in storage. Again, these are the basics, but you've got to make sure they're taken care of, that there's clear policies around where this data is sent. So we have strong data protection agreements with our institutions, right, with what we can and can't do with the data, and it's extremely locked down. You don't want to be giving your data to other companies, for instance, sort of LLM providers, just by pasting it in without having those data protection pieces in place. So in terms of, that's how we use these tools ethically, but where might bias come into them is another important point. One part is sort of annotation bias. So these models for sort of categorizing this text are based on human labeled sentences. Okay, this sentence is about X, this sentence is about Y. And there might be some bias there. And we put a lot of work in place to have sort of multiple labelers for each bit of text. Okay, so decision making around what's happening, there's clear instructions about what is expected, what's not. All of our labeling is done from people working in higher education, right? So it's really important to put that work in to make sure that there's as little bias as possible going into that initial training set. We want to make sure we have as broader exposure to different dialects, different ways of speaking, different ways of explaining things as possible. Again, to give our models the best chance of really capturing what students are saying. So that's why models developed at institutions can be good up to a point, but they're not going to capture when someone comes from elsewhere, or you don't have a large proportion of a certain student type at your institution, it can struggle to capture what they're trying to say. Whereas if you can get data from across lots of different universities, for instance, we analyze data from over 100 universities in the UK, you can really dig in and have confidence that they have seen examples of lots of different data. And that's where the benefit of our sort of large scale work with Advanced HE comes in, is that sort of real breadth of data. So how do we test this? Okay, so we are quite rigorous in that we have lots of metrics around fairness, around disparities between different groups, around different areas and topics being highlighted more than others. And we do lots of rigorous tests on our data to try and make sure that it's done in as fair way as possible. How can we sort of mitigate bias? Right, you're not going to remove all bias, right? But we mitigate as much as possible. The key thing is have a super specific model, right, for how you are capturing this these topics, this sentiment. So our models are entirely trained on UK HE data. That means they have a really good understanding of UK HE, the different comments, terminology, different things that go on. And it's really, really important, I think, because the more general models will bring in more general biases from the wider world, whereas we are very specific about UKHE, and that really lets our models be much stronger than they would be more general case models. Again, this is not enough by itself. We analyze a lot of data, but we also do a ton of QA, of human in the loop review of all these different workflows to make sure that we're capturing everything correctly and fairly. And it's really important. It's a lot of what the work we do. It might seem like we do a lot of machine learning, AI work, and that's the majority of our days. It's really not. It's really making sure that all these things work properly and are reliable and consistent and as free of bias as is possible. How can we sort of govern and make sure we have good oversight of these issues? So you need strong data protection impact assessments, DPIAs, right? You need really strong agreements with whoever you're giving your data to. You need a strong agreement with them of how they're going to use it, who owns that data, right? Who's processing that data. Like we're a GDPR processor by design. Again, it gives that clarity on who owns the ultimate data and what's going on, and what audits are being done, as I mentioned before, to try and make sure that that bias is reduced as much as possible.